It's the Brad and John Show.
It is the Brad and John Show. This is the December 13th. John, is that the correct date? December 13th?
That is incorrect. It is December 12th today.
Why do I think it's the 13th? Okay, it's December 12th. December 12th. We're off to a great start already. 2024. Did I get the year right, too?
No, it is 1969. Charlie Manson has just waged war in Death Valley, and the Mets just won the World Series, Brad.
Wow, amazing. This is the Brad and John Show. We start the show off with what we call A block. We've got this guy who comes in, and he does, and we've got some problems here. Hopefully this is going to work, okay? He comes in. What's your name again, sir?
I'm Casey Kasem.
And he starts us off with John's top three because John does this amazing thing every morning for 23 plus years. He posts links of all the important stories that you should know about in the state of Missouri. We boil it down to what John determines the top three, and we start off with...
In third place,
Brad, I want you to get your Nancy Rice natural bridge story together while I lay out this story. Yes, Brad, once again, the St. Louis City and St. Louis County merger is on the table. State Representative Ian Mackey from the St. Louis area, he's a Democrat, and he has pre-filed a bill, House Joint Resolution number 27, and it is verbatim the Better Together proposal from several years ago. For folks who aren't familiar with this or who are new to Missouri politics, there was a proposal years ago to merge St. Louis City and St. Louis County government. That proposal died. It died a slow and painful death. But Ian Mackey is back, and he says with the things that are going on recently, Brad, we got a mayoral election in the spring in St. Louis City. We have the head of Greater St. Louis Inc. flying the coop going to Columbus, Ohio. He says this is the time to talk about it again. So, Brad, today I have a story up from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I also have a story up from KMOV. So, Brad, what do you think about the merger? And particularly, do you have any anecdotes to share from your Better Together experience a few years ago?
John, first off, I will disagree with what you said. It died a slow and painful death. It died a rather rapid death when the merger plan called for the new super mayor who would be over the city and the county being Steve Stenger. And when Steve essentially got, I think it wasn't too many days after he was arrested for his crimes that he ultimately served time for, that's when the Better Together thing fell apart very rapidly. So, I mean, are you...
Well, you pay closer attention to county government than I do, Brad. So, your depiction might be accurate.
Well, that was the deal because of the fact there were chinks in the armor as we moved along there. But that's the thing that blew it up because people are going like, okay, Steve Stinger's going to be in charge of it, and he's going into jail. Now, the bizarre part of this is, little history lesson, okay? St. Louis and Baltimore are the only two cities in the country, we're talking major cities, that are not in a county. If you go to Chicago, the city of Chicago is in Jackson County. If you go across the state, the city of Kansas City I made a mistake. Chicago is in Cook County. Kansas City is in Jackson County. Columbia is in Boone County, okay? They are one and the same. They're intermingled. Back after the Civil War, the St. Louis City people were not happy with the fact that they felt that their tax revenue was going to fund these, at this point in time, settlers and farmers who lived in St. Louis County because there wasn't pretty much any development in St. Louis County. And they decided, we're not going to put our money out there. We're going to keep our money in the city. So they seceded from the county. And they became a separate independent city, not in a county. And through the years, once again, that was when the population of St. Louis County was probably in the tens of thousands, and the population of the city of the St. Louis was in the hundreds of thousands, which is now turned around. It's back, it's they call it in engineering field, is bass-ackwards, where I believe the county is pushing 1 million, and the city is lucky to have, what, 250,000 people now? I think it's dropped that far down, 260,000 people.
Yeah, I think so. And David Amoletti from KMOV had a unique anecdote in here. He reached out to both St. Louis City Mayor Tishaura Jones and St. Louis County Executive Sam Page. And here, Brad, I want you to see if you can find any similarities here. The St. Louis City Mayor's office responded with, "We work closely with the county, period. We see no need to consolidate when strong partnerships are already in place." And here's what Sam Page's office said, quote, "We work closely with the city, period. We see no need to consolidate when strong partnerships are already in place." Do those sound similar to you, Brad?
It was the same quote. That's interesting.
They
okay.
sent the same statement. Now, by the way, that shows good coordination. You have a palette, so to speak, of predetermined statements that were written probably years in advance. And then when an irksome reporter comes and annoys you, you just copy and paste and then you put it in an email. But it's nice to see that St. Louis City and County can coordinate on messaging.
Now, you probably don't realize the impact that I had on this. Very minor, but there was a couple different interesting things that happened. Years ago, when this whole thing was going on, the mayor of Chesterfield, I believe his name was Mayor Nations. Does that sound correct?
No, it is Bob Nation singular. There's no S in Nation.
But it's Bob Nation. Is he still the mayor?
Correct. No, I think I don't know.
Okay, well, he was upset.
I don't know if he is or not.
He was upset with St. Louis County. It gets very complicated because a lot of the new munis, including Chesterfield and places like Wildwood, incorporated after there was a law change that used to be that, like, if you buy something retail in Crestwood, that retail tax that's earmarked for Crestwood stays in Crestwood. But they changed the laws. Do you know about this? Do you know this whole crazy?
No, but give us some details.
Okay, they changed the law, and part of this was to essentially make it tougher, or not make it tougher, make it less attractive for people in the unincorporated areas of St. Louis County to incorporate. So what happens is, and this is what Nation was upset about, is that there's a percentage of the sales tax revenue that they get, and the rest of it goes in the general fund. Whereas Creve Coeur, Olivet, if they take in whatever is earmarked for their particular city, they get 100% of it. Whereas Chesterfield does not. Chesterfield gets like 60% of the city sales tax revenue, and the rest of it goes into a general fund. He at one point in time was talking about moving into St. Charles County. He wanted to essentially secede from St. Louis County and move into St. Charles County. And when I had him on the air, I interviewed him on this, and not to be a jerk about this, but I stumped him with something that he didn't know. And I said to him, well, and he talked about the boundary was the Missouri River. And I said, well, it is and it isn't, because part of St. Charles County is on the other side of the river. Do you know this crazy weird thing?
No, go ahead. Part
of St. Charles County, and matter of fact, this is sort of weird because if you're coming down on Highway 40, and as you're going straight, it's like that long straight strip you go toward. Then you make the slow sweeping curve to go onto the Daniel Boone Bridge into St. Charles County. South of that point, there's a place called I can't remember the name of the. It's interesting. If you look at it on a map, it's like an island, but sometimes it's an island, sometimes it's not. Depending upon the level of the river, sometimes you can actually walk or actually take a sport utility vehicle or a side-by-side or an ATV. You can take it across like it looks like a creek bed, and you're actually in St. Charles County because, once again, the river's changed path during the years. So part of St. Charles County is on the other side of the river, and the bizarre part of this is, the reason I know this is because of the fact that every once in a while you have a plane crash, and it comes off the end of the runway there at Spirit of St. Louis Airport, and they're going essentially to the west or to the southwest, and they crash on that island, and it's investigated by St. Charles County Police because of the fact.
Oh, what do you know?
So he didn't know this. Okay, so I got involved in this, and what I put up a website, which is long since gone, but I put up a website called I can't remember, it was something like Better Not Together or something like that, and I proposed that Wildwood and Chesterfield secede from St. Louis County and move into St. Charles County because Wildwood and Chesterfield both had contiguous borders with this island out there in St. Charles County. So in other words, part of Wildwood touches this part of St. Charles County, which is on the other side of the river, and part of Chesterfield touches this part of St. Charles County, which is on the opposite side of the river for most. Get what I'm saying with this? And
yeah, it's fascinating.
It actually became part, because it's funny, somebody sent me this, and somewhere I have it still. This was brought up in a Wildwood City Council meeting as to who I was and why I was doing what I was doing. And I actually went in front of the St. Charles County Council and pitched my my whole thing about the fact that St. Charles County should annex Chesterfield and essentially give them all their county revenue, all the county sales tax revenue, or the city sales tax revenue, and then St. Charles County would benefit by the fact that they would get their county sales tax revenue. And the night I was there, Mr. You just brought him up the other day. The two guys, Kelly and Hancock. John Hancock was there, and he was there pitching at the St. Charles County Council meeting. He worked for the Better Together people, and he was like a lobbyist they hired, and he was there talking to them about how they should consider moving in with St. Louis County and St. Louis City in this Better Together thing. And let me tell you, he wasn't very well received, as you can imagine, because the St. Charles County people were going like, we don't want any part of this mess. And they were like, just stay the hell out of town. And
yeah, hey, people that listen to A Block love to hear stories about taxes and government's conflict, Brad. Maybe that can lead us well into story number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
GOP consultant extraordinaire Gregg Keller was on Scott Fawn's midweek update yesterday. He covered a gamut of topics, Brad, and you inadvertently and unintentionally led us into 2 of those topics. Gregg talked about the fact that Governor Kehoe is looking to, and the Show Me Institute is promoting the idea of eliminating the state income tax, Brad. So Gregg laid out some of the Show Me Institute. They have a plan that they call a blueprint for Missouri in 2025. And Gregg laid out the idea of one day getting to a point that Missouri could eliminate its income tax, and talked a little bit about some of the ways in which we might make up that revenue. And Brad, unintentionally, you brought up, borders and governments fighting over borders. Gregg is also closely involved with a group called APAC, the American and Israel group that lobbies for pro-Israel policies. Excuse me. So Gregg and Scott talked a little bit about what's going on with Israel and Hamas. And also, fascinatingly, Brad, speaking of city and county merger, Gregg points out that there's really no reason for Republican legislators who want to tackle crime to take Tishaura Jones seriously. Gregg said, why would anybody that's a Republican in Jeff City even entertain phone calls from a St. Louis City Democrat, because they clearly aren't serious about fighting crime in St. Louis City? So they covered a whole gamut of topics, including Eric Schmidt, including what's going on in D.C. Nuclear power, Brad, was also a topic on this show. I think you would be interested in that. So, as always, I have the timestamps up on my website today.
The other thing is talking about that. The other thing on that one was I just lost my train of thought on this. I'll tell you what, let's move on.
Well, and on nuclear power, let me mention, too, on nuclear power, over the weekend, Garrett Bowles from KWTO had a guy named Curtis Trent on, and he's a state senator, and he was talking about nuclear power and kind of what changed Missouri's approach to it, Brad. Those are the type of topics that I know you're pretty well up on, but I think you would be interested in hearing what Curtis Trent had to say about that.
Do you know what the newest trend is nuclear power is?
Doing it in your backyard.
Well, not too far from that, because of the fact that there's a couple of companies that are doing this right now, and they're trying to get NRC approval and EPA approval and the whole bit. Instead of building these massive nuclear power plants like we have in Callaway County, they build essentially what they call packaged plants, which are relatively small plants which would go into areas where essentially, like if a subdivision, if a developer was going to put in a subdivision, he would put in one of these packaged nuclear power plants.
No way.
Oh, yeah.
Now that you mention it, Brad, that's at timestamp number 1050 in the Gregg Keller interview.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing they talk about, because of the fact that this is a new technology, and I believe it's being used in Europe already. Where and essentially the interesting part of it is when the nuclear power plant, essentially becomes obsolete, when the nuclear the rods or whatever they're spent, or whatever the heck they call it, they literally pick the thing up and they take it away in total, and they pop a new one in. So in other words, you don't have the problem with pulling out the rods and all that kind of stuff, which is the current bugaboo with nuclear power, because what do you do with all the spent nuclear rods after they've served their useful life? But yeah, it's pretty interesting, and some of them are to the point where if like essentially a shipping container, some of them are like the size of a shipping container, where they would literally drop this thing in, turn it on, and away it goes, and it just essentially does its own thing, and it requires very little maintenance, and it would supply power to like literally thousands of homes, and no solar panels. Now, see, there is truly, when you lived in that subdivision, if you say, well, I don't want that Ameren UE power, I want nuclear power, you go, you're already on it, because of the fact you're on the packaged nuclear plant. See, as opposed to the bogus Ameren UE thing where they say, hey, if you send us $20 a month more, we'll give you solar power at your house.
They should just get a number of people to band together and buy ads on westplexweather.com. Speaking of consultants, Brad, why don't we get into story number one with the remaining 1 minute we have left?
There we go, number one.
Brad, on October 14th, you and I got on the air, as we do Monday through Friday, and we talked about a brand new political action committee that nobody saw coming. I'm going to put you on the spot. What started a PAC that you would never expect to start a PAC, Brad?
Gays for Gaza?
Yes, Gays for Gaza, yes. And boy, I had a punchline there, but we got to get back up on YouTube someday. So, Brad, no, the gentleman was Harrison Butker, the Chiefs kicker. And Brad, on October 14th, you and I had a robust discussion. And I had the theory that, you know what, I think maybe there's a chance this is just a good scheme for political consultants to make a little bit of money. Well, Brad, the Kansas City Star today has a piece from a guy named Daniel DeRochers. He's their lead D.C. reporter. And it turns out that Harrison Butker's PAC raised about $36,000 this fall, and none of it went to politicians. 91% of it, Brad, went to a political consulting firm that handled his fundraising. Who could have possibly seen that coming, Brad?
So in other words, he raised money to raise money. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That's exactly it. Yeah. Now, I'll tell you where I was wrong, Brad. When we talked about this on October 14th and I laid this out, I assumed that it had been a Missouri political consulting group that went to him with this fundraising idea. And it turns out that Harrison Butker actually worked with a Pennsylvania group, called Frontline Strategies. And they're quite reputable. Actually, they work for Nancy Mace. They work for a number of other Republicans. So they have a good reputation. But as it turns out, Brad, at least in 2024, the primary function of this PAC was to get a fundraising operation started. Now, if you're Frontline Strategies, you'd probably say, hey, it takes money to make money, right? You can't expect to raise money without putting a little money in the front end. But Brad, at least in 2024, it looks like the PAC didn't do a whole lot. You get what I'm saying?
John, you talking about a subject that is very touchy with me because of the fact that, once again, I have personal experience with dealing with charities, and I won't mention the charity, but if you want me to pick this up in B Block, I'll explain to you why I was very, very upset about something that happened to me. When I was persuaded to be like on the board, not necessarily on the board, but like an advisory kind of board, and when the numbers were revealed, I thought to myself, this is a scam. It really was a scam. And I'm going like, man, this is sad. And you know what the problem was? We were raising money. You know how much money we raised?
How much?
We lost money.
Yeah, I bet. And was that because of consultant or fundraiser fees?
It was because of all the stuff they did. They paid money for this, they paid money for that, they put money for this, they paid this company, they paid that company, they bought T-shirts, they bought this, they bought that, they bought that. And literally, when you looked at it on a balance sheet, when you saw all these people that donated money to this cause, and then when in other words, that would be top line, and then middle line would be the expenses. Middle line was bigger than top line, so the bottom line was negative numbers. So it's like, okay, what these people that gave this money, essentially it went out the window. It's gone. It just evaporated. It did nothing for the cause. It's not. If anything, you put the charity in a negative net equity position on that. I mean, it's just weird. And what's sad about it is there's a lot of this stuff that goes on and nobody talks about it because you dare not talk about a charity that's out there, oh my God, don't say anything bad about blah, 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 because they do so much good in the community. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know. And I know we're over time here, Brad, but it's fair to point out that if your frontline strategies, you probably say, look, you can't expect to have a professional fundraising operation and do it on a shoestring. Like that's just not viable. But if you're a small dollar donor that likes Harrison Butker, that's not a big political person, and maybe you gave $50 or $100, you look at this story and you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's sad, and his name started being tainted because of this, correct?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the news articles don't help, and the fact that there's kind of do-gooder groups in D.C. that call this whole thing a scam, those headlines don't help either.
Yeah, I hear you.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?